Hi, welcome to today's video. Today we are going to be looking into the theory of consumer behavior. The objectives of this video are for you to understand how a demand curve for a product can be derived, analyze the effects of a change in price of a product on consumer purchases, list and explain the basic concepts of utility, to understand what marginal utility is, to understand what consumer equilibrium and consumer surplus is, and also to understand the various school of thoughts under consumer behavior. Moving into it, what is consumer behavior? Consumer behavior is basically the study of how consumers use or maximizes income fully among its various competing needs. How a consumer choose between which goods to purchase and how much of those goods to purchase in order to fully maximize its utility given the amount of income he earns. The theory explains simply the law of demand, how given a low price, demand would rise, and given a high price, demand would decrease. This theory explains or states the reason why the law of demand is what it is. We will consider the basic concepts of utility now. We have total utility, marginal utility, and average utility. Total utility refers to the total amount of satisfaction derived by a consumer given the total amount of commodity or goods and service he consumes. For example, the total utility obtained from an apple or from 10 apples is the total number of apples I consumed. Total utility is just basically the summation of the satisfaction derived by a consumer given the amount of products or goods he consumes. Marginal utility, on the other hand, refers to the satisfaction derived by adding a unit or one more unit of good and service to the amount of good consumed. Looking at the table below, we can see that quantity was 0 and total utility and marginal utility remained on 0 as well. When quantity increased to 1, total utility was 50 and marginal utility became equal to total utility. When it increased to 2 and total utility was 95, marginal utility became 45. So how was marginal utility gotten? It was gotten from total utility of quantity 2 minus total utility of quantity 1. Total utility of quantity 2 in this case is 95 minus total utility of quantity 1, which is 50, and that was how we got 45. Coming down, when quantity increased to 3, total utility was 130. Then to obtain the marginal utility, subtracts 130, that is TU3 minus TU2, which is 95. 130 minus 95 was 35. Coming down, we also have 160. 160 minus 130 gave us 30. So marginal utility is basically the satisfaction derived from any additional unit of or quantity of good. The satisfaction derived from any additional unit or quantity of goods. Looking at the diagram below is a curve of total utility curve. We can see that it was going up and then it got to a particular point, which is called the point of saturation or the point of consumer equilibrium, where it reached sloping downward, which now brings us to law of diminishing marginal utility. The law of diminishing marginal utility. This principle states that as more and more units of a commodity is consumed, the total satisfaction derived will begin to decline. The principle of marginal utility states that more and more units of a particular good or service consumed during a specific period of time, the satisfaction derived from each additional unit of the good or service decreases. The law of marginal utility states that as the more goods a consumer consumes, it will get to a point and then satisfaction derived from the additional units will begin to decline. looking at the diagram again, we can see that the consumer added more and more units to the total quantity he consumed, but it got to a particular point that his total utility has reached its peak, and then it began to decline, basically explaining what the law of diminishing utility states. Moving to consumer equilibrium. Consumer equilibrium is basically that point, it's just that point we have before the curve started to decline. It is a point where total utility reaches its maximum, where the consumer has gotten to that it cannot increase total utility obtained from a good given the consumer's budget. What is a budget? The budget is basically the amount of goods or the amount of money a consumer has planned to spend at a given period of time. The consumer equilibrium occurs when total utility cannot be increased by shifting expenditure from one good to another. For example, the consumer has a particular amount of money to spend on two goods. Let's use meat pie and soft drink. The equilibrium occurs when the marginal utility derived from meat pie is equal to that of soft drink. If a case occurs and the marginal utility of either of them decreases, it would lead to a state of disequilibrium. We also have the derivation of the demand curve, how the demand curve can be derived. We have cardinal utility, diminishing marginal utility, constant marginal utility of money, consumer rationality. But let me start explaining. Let's start from cardinal utility. The satisfaction derived is measurable, in this case, by an imaginary numerical term known as utils. Under the cardinal utility, it is believed that utility can be measured by a numerical term known as utils. Diminishing marginal utility, like I explained before, is when the satisfaction of is when more and more units of a good consumed by a consumer causes the satisfaction derived to decrease. The constant marginal utility of money. This occurs when the marginal utility of money remains constant regardless of whether the income of the consumer increases or decreases. The value of money or marginal utility derived from money would remain constant, and it is left to the consumer to maximize his or her income fully in order to fully enjoy utility. We also have consumer rationality. Consumer rationality is a situation whereby a consumer would only purchase goods that would satisfy him using his or her income maximally. The average consumer would always maintain the utility maximization posture in his spending pattern. When an average consumer is spending, what would be in their mind would be to maximize utility, to get satisfaction from what they are spending. Utility is the satisfaction derived from the consumption of a particular good, regardless of if the good is harmful or to the consumer or not. Utility is just basically the satisfaction a consumer derives. Let's use an example of cigarettes. We all know that cigarettes is not really good for the health of consumers, but people still consume them. Why? Because they derive utility from that product. They derive satisfaction from the product. So the product is harmful to them, but they still derive satisfaction from it. That is what utility is: the satisfaction derived from the goods a consumer consumes. We are going to be looking into the cardinal and ordinal school of thought. The cardinalists believe, like I said earlier, that utility is measurable by a unit called utils. It is measurable by a numerical term called utils. In this case, they believe that utility is measurable. That is, the consumer can measure the amount of satisfaction he has derived from consuming the particular goods. They also believe that utility is comparable. That is, the consumer can compare the utility derived from good A and good B. The consumer can compare how much satisfaction each good gives them. Like, for instance, a consumer, let's say, buys egg roll from a particular store and goes to another store to get egg roll, a consumer can, under this school of thought, can compare between the two of them, which of them provided more satisfaction to the consumer. We also have the ordinal approach. The ordinal school of thought believe that utility is not measurable. Rather, utility is rather consumers can only rank their preferences in order of relative importance without assigning any numerical value. Under this school of thought, they believe that utility is not measurable by any numerical value. They also believe that utility is ranked, and utility can only be ranked by consumer, and they believe that utility is not additive, unlike the cardinalists that believe that utility is additive. We've discussed consumer equilibrium, and we've discussed consumer surplus under demand, but I'm going to explain what they are and give the differences again. Consumer equilibrium is just the state where a consumer has reached its peak, or the highest point where utility can no longer be, where the total utility derived from a particular good can no longer be increased. The equilibrium is basically the highest point where total utility can reach, and at this point it can no longer be increased. Equilibrium is a state where utility has reached its highest point or its peak, and at this point any additional unit of goods consumed by the consumer would not make utility to increase, rather it would cause utility to decrease. And I gave the example of meat pie and soft drink. If the marginal utility derived from meat pie is equal to that of soft drink, consumer equilibrium has occurred. While consumer surplus on the other hand refers to the total amount of money a consumer was willing to pay for a particular product and the amount of money he actually pays to obtain that product. The amount of money a consumer was willing to pay for a particular product and the amount he actually pays for the product. In this case, it's the amount of satisfaction a consumer expected to derive from a particular product and the amount of satisfaction a consumer derives from the product. Next up, we're going to be looking at some examples under marginal utility, total utility, and average utility. Average utility is the total utility divided by the quantity of goods consumed. Total utility divided by quantity of goods consumed. Given the example below, we are going to be looking at how total utility, average utility, and marginal utility are related. Like I said earlier, total utility is the total amount of satisfaction derived from the quantity of goods consumed. Average utility is the total utility divided by the quantity of goods consumed. And marginal utility is satisfaction derived from an additional unit of goods consumed. We can see that the quantity of the good is when the quantity of the good was at zero. Total utility, average utility, and marginal utility all remained at 0. When it increased to 1, total utility was 100. Now to calculate average utility. At that point, average utility will be 100, which is total utility divided by Q. So the formula for average utility basically is total utility divided by Q, where we have 100 divided by 1. So at that point, average utility remains at 100. Marginal utility, which is known as a change in total utility divided by a change in quantity. Marginal utility is a change in total utility divided by a change in quantity. What is the change in total utility? The change in total utility is basically the total utility below minus the one above divided by the quantity below minus the one above. Example, we have total utility. Let's look at marginal utility when the quantity was at 2. We have marginal utility for quantity 2 would be equal to total utility 2, that is TU2, minus the total utility 1, that is TU1, over quantity 2 minus quantity 1. Total utility 2 was 300. That is total utility when the quantity was 2. And total utility when the quantity was 1 was 100. Divided by quantity 2 minus 1. 300 minus 100 is 200 over 2 minus 1 is 1. So basically, marginal utility at quantity 2 became 200. Moving down, we're looking for average utility at quantity 3. Remember, average utility is total utility divided by quantity. So in this case, we have total utility to be 360 divided by quantity, which is 3. 360 divided by 3 was equals to 120, and that was how average utility became 120. Total utility divided by quantity at 3. Then looking at the marginal utility at quantity 3, we have the total utility of quantity 3 minus total utility of quantity 2 divided by quantity 3 minus quantity 2, where we now have total utility at quantity 3 to be 360 minus total utility at quantity 2 to be 300 divided by quantity 3 was 3 minus 2, which is basically 60 divided by 1, which was 60, and that was how we got the 60, the marginal utility. Moving down to quantity 4, we have total utility at 400, and recalling the formula for average utility, which is total utility divided by quantity. We have total utility as 400 divided by the quantity at 4. 400 divided by 4 was equal to 100. Then for the marginal utility, we have total utility at quantity 4 minus total utility at quantity 3 divided by quantity 4 minus quantity 3. Total utility at quantity 4 was 400 minus 360 divided by 4 minus 3, which was equal to 40. 40 over 1, which is 40. Moving down to the quantity of 5. When the quantity was 5, what was the average utility? Average utility, remember, TU divided by Q. And here we have total utility to be 400 TU. And the quantity was 5, which made average utility to be 400 divided by 5, which was 80. Then marginal utility, remember, is total utility 5 at quantity 5 minus total utility at quantity 4 minus quantity 5 and quantity 4, where we have 400 minus 400 divided by 5 minus 4, which led to 0. Then moving down, we see that quantity has become 6. To get the total average utility, you divide 360 by 6, which gave us 60. Then to get the marginal utility, remember, is a change in total utility divided by a change in quantity. So therefore, marginal utility was TU 6, total utility at quantity 6 minus total utility at quantity 5, which is 360 minus 400 divided by 6 minus 5, which led to minus 40. So looking at this whole table, we can see that total utility continued to increase from 100 to 300, 360 to 400, which was the maximum point of satisfaction the consumer could derive. 400 was the maximum point. At this point, at quantity 5, it remained as 400. Then we can see that an increase in the quantity from 4 to 5 led to We can see that an increase in quantity from 4 to 5 made the total utility to stay at 400. Then an increase from 5 to 6 led to total utility to decrease from 400 to 360. And we can see that as total utility increases, marginal utility decreases. And when total utility stays, the marginal utility is at the maximum, marginal utility becomes 0. That was as quantity 5. And then when total utility starts to decrease, marginal utility becomes negative. But for the average utility curve, we can see that as total utility increases, average utility decreases, but it never becomes negative, just like we've seen in the curve. It decreased from 150 to 200 and continued like that, but it never became negative. So that would be all for consumer behavior, theory of consumer behavior. Thank you.